The debt crisis broke out in Greece in 2010, and it has sent shockwaves throughout the entire Eurozone. Unfortunately, the recovery process has been very slow, and market watchers are speculating that it will continue to put further dents on the global economy. Before we move on, let me distinguish the difference between the European debt crisis and the 2008 financial crisis. The chaos we experienced in 2008, that was from problems in the private finance sector, whereas now we're seeing problems from certain fiscal policies, weak ones carried out by certain European countries. How other industrialized nations do actually directly affects Korea, being that we're so export-oriented, and this has left many people in Korea wondering, how are we going to compete? How are we going to survive? Well, to find out further aspects and prospects of the Korean economy, we're going to be meeting with the EU ambassador to Korea, Mr. Tomasz Kozlowski. Hello, Mr. Kozlowski. Thank you so much for your time and for meeting with us today.
Hello. Good afternoon. It's my real pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. It's been a year now since you've been stationed here as the EU ambassador to Korea. How do you like it so far?
I'm very glad to be here before being posted here in January 2011 and the country. I had some imaginations about Korea, but when I came here I found Korea even more dynamic and more efficient than I had expected. That's why I'm really very glad to be here and to work for EU-Korean relations.
Thank you very much for that. Well, we'd like to thank you again, Mr. Kozlowski, for your time today.
It's my real pleasure to meet you again.
Now, you are the EU ambassador to Korea, and unfortunately, when we think of the word Europe, it's hard not to link it with, of course, the ongoing debt crisis we're seeing in Greece. In your opinion, when do you think we can maybe see some stability in the Eurozone?
Yes, indeed. The European Union is going now through a period of some financial and economic difficulties. But let's put it into the broader picture.
Okay.
First, sovereign debt crisis in Europe is experienced only in some, I repeat, some EU member states. If you would take European Union as entity, the budgetary situation in Europe is much, much better than in some other partners, including the US and Japan. The second one, if some observers make conclusions that euro is about to collapse, but they are not able to explain why euro currency is very stable and rather strong vis-à-vis other foreign currencies. But nevertheless, we have some problems. And one of the reasons we are not able to solve them quickly is that 10 years ago we introduced monetary union, but so far in our process of integration we have not introduced fiscal and economic union. And this is the main challenge. European Union is not unitary state. But I can assure you that European leaders, they have shown a full determination to cope with these challenges.
I'm actually really glad you brought up looking at the big picture, because you're absolutely right. It's not just the Eurozone that's seeing some problems.
European Union situation is part of a global economic turbulences, and we have to remember that these turbulences started 3 years ago and not in Europe.
Looking at the bigger picture, like you mentioned, when can maybe we expect to see the global economy then start to stabilize and kind of ease out of the difficulties we're seeing right now?
My personal assessment at this stage is that the perspective for global economy now are a bit better than it was 6 months ago. I mean, the situation in Europe is about to stabilize soon. We are going to reach moderate growth. I have read that there are some symptoms of growth in the United States. Asia remains to be an engine for growth. Yep. It means that the perspectives are more optimistic, but of course probably below our expectations. But at the same time we have to be very clear that we still have a big number of challenges. Still, There are some budgetary problems both in Europe and the United States and in some other countries. The financial markets at this stage are not very confident that politicians will be able to handle certain issues. The third point is that this is not only a question of economic growth, but also there are some social security and social problems which have come up. In the meantime, the question of equal distribution of wealth, the difference between the richest and the poorest people in countries, and probably the politicians should handle these issues as well. And another challenge is, which my opinion is one of the biggest, is the global imbalances. I mean that probably a system in which certain parts of the world, in this case East Asia, produces much more than it's able to consume, and the Western countries consume much more than are able to produce. I'm not so sure that this system is sustainable, and probably some corrections to the system should be made. And in this case, I would like to congratulate Korea as the host of the last G20 summit.
Yes.
I mean, the G20 has proved to be an instrument for the most important countries to handle certain economic and financial issues. And we are on a good way to continue this process.
Our economic prospects, they're not as negative as maybe some other countries, yet our growth for this year is forecast to be lower than of recent years. What would you say maybe would be a good way to revitalize Korea's economy?
I mean, my first reaction is that I don't think that the Korean economy needs revitalization.
But everyone is feeling pressure because we're looking at the figures and it's
I
lower.
understand, but please take into account that this is my opinion, that the Korean economy has a very healthy and sound fundamentals. Of course, there is some kind of slowdown in economic growth, but please take into account that 2 years ago, economic growth in Korea was 6.2%. Last year, it was 4%. This year may be a bit slower, but still, this is a very impressive growth. And of course, why there is some kind of slowdown? Probably because of external factors. There's less demand for Korean goods, but at the same time, probably there are some internal factors. Maybe Korea should encourage or stimulate internal demand as well. But overall, my feeling is that for Korea has pursued a very proper policy to be open to the outside world, being a trading nation, through FTAs, through being very positive about liberalization. But at the same time, probably Korea has to look more carefully about the changing circumstances in the outside world and to adjust its economy to the current challenges. But don't complain that for economy, which has reached already a high level of development, the growth around 4% is something you should not be glad.
I think we just focus on the figure and not on the fact that it's still growth, right?
It's still growth and in a very good pace.
Well, I mean, you did bring up exports, and Korea is very export-oriented. We are some of our strongest industries involving automobiles, ships, petrochemicals, home appliances, IT. Of course, we need to stay on top of our game. We can't expect to be at the top tier without work for it. So how would you recommend for these industries here in our country to stay dominant?
This is a very good question, but the answer is not so easy. If you would take factors of Korea's growth for last 10 years, you are absolutely right. Shipbuilding, IT, petrochemical products have been the main engines for growth. But if you would take Korean economy 20 years ago, the picture was probably a bit different. And the outside world is changing. That's why this is for Korean business leaders to think to what extent Korea will remain competitive in these fields, or there is a need to readjust or to change profile or structure of the Korean economy to adjust better for this challenging world. That's why, but my feeling is that so far the Korean economy has been extremely successful in adapting to new challenges.
Korea and EU became one step closer. We did have our FTA. We can also expect the FTA with the US go into effect March 15th. So we're really trying to make Korea into this free trade hub. Well, how do you expect that to affect relations with Korea and the EU?
The EU-Korea FTA has been the most comprehensive and deepest FTA agreement the European Union has ever concluded with a third partner. And the same case for Korea. And it reflects the common understanding between the European Union and Korea that open trade and trade liberalization is one of the engines for growth. And of course, so far, after 6 months or 7 months of the implementation of EU-Korea FTA, we have achieved increase in our trade despite of this global turbulences. This is not only EU-Korea FTA, but this is Korea is, as you mentioned, is a hub. Korea has concluded 45 free trade agreements. It means that for such country like Korea, which is a trading country, this is the only one way to go forward. And despite of this international global turbulences, Korea has never declared any kind of measures to isolate its economy or to introduce any protectionist measures. And at the same time, the European Union and Korea were very effective promoters of trade liberalization at the global stage. That's why this is the way I'm sure Korea will follow, despite of this nowadays political debates in Korea.
It's not just economic relations, though, that Korea and the EU shares. We're seeing cultural exchanges and whatnot. And to take it on a lighter note, even K-pop is invading Europe as well.
But we are very happy.
Yes. Well, what kind of future partnerships do you maybe envision for us?
I mean, the European Union and Korea decided to declare its partnership as a strategic one. But from our point of view, strategic partnership means something, and we, the European Union, at this stage has only 10 strategic partners all over the world. It means that both sides decided to develop their political cooperation while dealing with global, international, regional issues like climate change, counter-piracy, counter-terrorism, to development cooperation. We are looking for practical cooperation, how to help, for example, Arab countries to solve their problems, Central Asian countries, and so on and so on. This is one pillar of this partnership, which is based on European Union ambitions to become a global partner and Korea's ambitions to become more recognized international player. The second pillar is trade and economic relationship. We already discussed FTA. This is a key element of our relationship with trade balance, with trade volume more than 100 billion US dollars. The European Union is the largest foreign investor here. And of course, we are very much interested, both sides, to develop cooperation in such fields like science, technology, education, culture. You mentioned the K-pop ensembles in Paris. Korean movies are becoming very popular, and this cultural exchange is very, very active. To be honest, I have been able to attend concerts by European symphonic orchestras or quintets here in Korea more often than in Brussels.
What are the odds of that? And maybe you may go to a K-pop concert while you're visiting Europe and
with
not
great
here.
Pleasure.
Right? Well, we covered such a vast array of topics today, and thank you so much for providing insight, especially with your fresh perspective on things, on so many different issues that faces Korea today. Thank you very much again for your time, sir.
It has been my real pleasure to be a guest at the Arirang TV, and I'm for your disposal in the future if you are interested in my views.
I think we will be.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
Well, just like Mr. Tomasz Kozlowski said, Korea is becoming much more competitive. And that means we're attracting that much more foreign talent to our country as well. Now, these are foreign talent that have graduated from some of the top universities in the world, so they could have their pick at some of the top companies in the world, yet they've chosen Korea. Well, our team met with some of these expats to ask them what attracted them here to Korea.